In an era of mounting economic anxiety and political turbulence, the Trump administration has unveiled what it calls a lifeline for struggling Americans, a $2,000 cash payment funded entirely by tariffs on imported goods. On paper, it sounds like a win. Free money for families who need it most, extracted not from taxpayers, but from foreign companies doing business on American soil. No new taxes, no strings attached, just relief. But, if you strip away the political packaging, a very different picture emerges. This isn't a rescue plan, it's a shell game. And the real cost is far greater than anyone's being told. Because behind this promise lies a deepening crisis that most Americans don't yet see. The United States is carrying more than $38 trillion in national debt, a figure so staggering it's almost impossible to comprehend. Inflation remains stubborn. Interest rates are elevated, and confidence in the dollar, once the unshakable foundation of global finance, is beginning to show cracks. Meanwhile, as Washington scrambles to keep the system afloat with borrowed money and political theater, another superpower is making a very different set of moves. China isn't printing cash to patch holes. It's accumulating gold, expanding production, building financial reserves, and quietly preparing for a world where American dominance is no longer guaranteed. Two nations, two strategies. One is buying time, the other is buying power. And the gap between them is widening faster than most people realize. The tariff dividend. A political band-aid on a bleeding wound. Let's start with the plan itself. President Trump has publicly committed to sending $2,000 checks to lower and middle-income Americans, funded exclusively through revenue collected from tariffs on foreign goods. He's been emphatic about one thing: this money won't come from taxpayers. It's going to come from imports, from China, from Mexico, from countries he claims have been taking advantage of the United States for decades. It's a message designed to resonate, and politically, it makes sense. Americans are angry. They're frustrated by rising costs, stagnant wages, and a sense that the system no longer works in their favor. So when a leader promises direct relief, cash in hand, no bureaucracy, no complexity, it's hard not to pay attention. But here's the problem. Tariffs aren't magic. They don't generate wealth out of thin air. They're taxes. And like all taxes, someone has to pay them. When the government places a tariff on imported goods, the cost doesn't disappear. It gets passed along to importers, to retailers, and ultimately to you. Every time you buy groceries, electronics, clothing, or household goods, you're absorbing that tariff in the form of higher prices. It's invisible, but it's real. So when Trump promises to give you $2,000 back, what he's really doing is returning a fraction of what you've already paid through inflation at the checkout counter. It's like draining water from a bucket, then handing you a cup and calling it generosity. Government budget analysts have been clear about the math. To fund a nationwide payout of this scale would require at least 2 full years of tariff revenue. And that assumes tariffs remain in place, imports don't collapse, and foreign nations don't retaliate. None of those assumptions are safe. In other words, this isn't economic policy. It's political theater, a short-term optics move designed to shore up support in a midterm election year when approval ratings are sliding and public confidence is cracking. The relief may feel real for a moment, but the underlying problem, rising costs, weakening purchasing power, and a fragile economic foundation, doesn't go away. It just gets buried under a headline. And while Americans are distracted by the promise of a payout, the real damage is already being done. The hidden tax, how tariffs are crushing American households. Let's talk about what tariffs actually cost you. Not in theory, not in political speeches, but in real dollars, on real shelves, in real time. Multiple independent research institutions have analyzed the impact of Trump's tariff policies, and while their estimates vary slightly, the conclusion is unanimous. American families are paying significantly more because of these trade taxes. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that the average household is spending roughly $2,000 more per year under current tariff structures. Yale's Budget Lab and other policy groups project even steeper costs, some reaching as high as $3,800 annually when all 2025 tariffs are fully accounted for. These aren't abstract numbers. They show up every single day in your grocery bill, in the price of a new phone, in the cost of basic necessities that used to be affordable but now stretch your budget thinner each month. So when the administration promises a $2,000 check, it doesn't even cover the damage, and it certainly doesn't last. Because unlike the tariffs, which are permanent policy changes, the payout is almost certainly temporary. A one-time relief measure that could easily vanish after the next election cycle. Now let's get specific. Let's talk about food. Tariffs hit the food supply chain in two devastating ways. First, they raise the cost of imported food products and agricultural inputs like fertilizers and equipment. Second, they give domestic producers room to raise their own prices, knowing that foreign competition has been artificially weakened. The result? Everything gets more expensive. Soybeans, corn, wheat, pork, beef, poultry, dairy. These are staples, the building blocks of American meals, and all of them are feeling the pressure. But it gets worse, because tariffs don't exist in a vacuum. When the United States slaps tariffs on imports, other countries respond with retaliatory measures. They target American exports. They shut down markets. And farmers, who depend on those overseas buyers, are left holding the losses. According to the Congressional Research Service, retaliatory tariffs have hit American agriculture particularly hard. Soybeans, sorghum, wheat, and corn, the crops that feed both families and livestock, have all been targeted. And when export demand collapses, domestic prices destabilize. Take beef as an example. Prices were already climbing due to supply constraints. The U.S. cattle herd is at its lowest level in 70 years. That alone pushes costs higher. Now add a proposed 50% tariff on Brazilian beef, one of the largest suppliers to the American market. Stack that on top of existing duties, and the total burden could exceed 70%. What does that mean for you? Ground beef hit approximately $6.10 per pound as of mid-2025, and it's still rising. When import costs spike, meat packers and grocery retailers don't absorb the difference. They pass it directly to consumers. So even the burgers at your backyard barbecue now cost noticeably more than they did a year ago. Or consider your morning coffee. The United States doesn't grow coffee domestically in any meaningful volume. We rely almost entirely on imports from Brazil, Colombia, and Vietnam. And right now, tariffs ranging from 10 to 50% are hitting those suppliers. A pound of ground coffee reached $8.41 in July 2025, up more than 14% compared to the previous year. Roasters are responding the only ways they can. Some are raising prices, others are changing recipes, blending cheaper beans to maintain margins. A few are absorbing losses, but that's not sustainable. For you, the end result is the same. Your morning cup costs more, and there's almost no alternative because the entire supply chain runs through countries now facing trade barriers. Now here's the kicker. Who gets hurt most by all of this? Lower-income families. They spend a larger share of their income on food and basic goods. So tariffs function like a hidden sales tax, one that disproportionately punishes those who can least afford it. Wealthier households feel the strain too, of course. But they have room to adjust. They can buy less, substitute brands, or absorb the cost without fundamentally changing their lifestyle. For families living paycheck to paycheck, there's no buffer. Every dollar counts. So when the administration talks about a tariff dividend, remember this. Tariffs don't hand you free money. They shift costs onto consumers while protecting certain industries and filling government coffers. The relief you're promised is funded by the pain you're already experiencing. And the financial damage doesn't stop at your grocery bill. It goes much, much deeper. The debt trap, borrowing from a future that can't pay. Here's the number that should terrify every American. The United States added approximately $1 trillion in national debt in just 71 days. Read that again. $1 trillion in 71 days. That pace is historically unprecedented. It reveals just how stretched the federal government already is. Before it promises any new payouts, before it funds any new programs, before it does anything except maintain the status quo. Now add Trump's tariff dividend on top of that. If $2,000 goes to roughly 85% of Americans, the total cost lands somewhere near $600 billion. And here's the brutal truth. Tariff revenue doesn't come close to covering it, not even remotely. So what happens when the math doesn't work? The government does what it always does. It borrows. In plain terms, the check you receive isn't funded by tariffs at all. It's funded by debt. Debt that you, your children, and future generations will eventually carry. The administration wants to present this as a dividend, a return on your investment. But in reality, it's borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today. The U.S. Treasury doesn't have a surplus. It has rising obligations. Social Security, Medicare, defense spending, interest payments on existing debt. And with every new dollar borrowed, those interest costs climb higher. Think about what that means. Money that could be invested in schools, infrastructure, healthcare, or innovation gets redirected just to service the debt. The government isn't building. It isn't investing. It's maintaining an ever-expanding bill. And as interest costs rise, the pressure spreads. Mortgage rates stay elevated. Car loans get more expensive. Small businesses struggle to access capital. Job growth slows. Because when the government crowds out private borrowing by sucking up so much capital, everyone else pays the price. So that $2,000 check may feel like relief in the moment, but the true cost stretches far beyond it. You'll pay. Your family will pay. The next generation will pay. In the form of higher taxes, weaker public services, reduced economic mobility, and a system that's increasingly fragile. And while America piles on record debt just to stay afloat, another superpower is doing the exact opposite. The inequality machine, how stimulus always flows upward. Now let's talk about where that $2,000 actually goes. Because not all money moves the same way through the economy. And understanding that difference reveals who really wins when the government hands out cash. Lower-income households spend stimulus money immediately. Groceries, rent, utilities, gas, clothing, basic necessities that can't be delayed. That spending keeps them afloat, but it doesn't build wealth. Wealthier households, on the other hand, spend some and save or invest the rest. They channel a portion into stocks, real estate, bonds, and other assets. And that's where the real wealth gets created. When stimulus flows into the economy, it drives up demand. Walmart sees higher sales. Amazon sees more orders. Banks, insurance companies, and major corporations see bigger profits. And who owns those companies? The top 1%. The people who already control more than 30% of all wealth in the United States. Research from Stanford University and other institutions shows this pattern clearly. The poorest Americans spend nearly everything they receive. The richest save and invest most of it. And within a short time, the money that was supposed to help the struggling middle class has cycled back into the hands of those who need it least. You might ask, doesn't consumption help the economy? Isn't spending good? Yes, but only when incomes grow sustainably. When consumption rises because prices are rising, not because people are earning more, you don't get growth. You get inflation. And when wages don't keep pace with inflation, real wealth shrinks for millions. Meanwhile, asset owners benefit because their holdings rise in value when the money supply expands. Stocks go up, real estate appreciates, bonds pay higher yields. In effect, what looks like democratic relief, everyone gets a check, ends up reinforcing inequality. The payout feels equal, but the outcome is skewed. The relief you get today becomes the wealth someone else accumulates tomorrow. For you, that means a $2,000 check might ease the immediate pressure. But long-term, you pay through inflation, higher interest rates, reduced wage power, and tougher competition for basic necessities like housing. The system isn't designed to level the playing field. It's designed to preserve the advantage of capital. And while American households fall further behind, another nation is quietly positioning itself to exploit these imbalances. A shift that becomes even clearer when we look at what's happening in Beijing. China's golden strategy: dumping dollars, stacking bars. While the United States performs fiscal acrobatics just to stay solvent, China is building something entirely different, something quieter, something harder, something real: gold. China produced approximately 380 metric tons of gold in 2024. By the third quarter of 2025, it had increased its official reserves to roughly 2,335 tons. As the world's largest gold producer and one of the fastest accumulators of reserves, Beijing is turning its vaults into a fortress, quite literally stacking gold bars while G7 nations stack debt. This isn't symbolic. Gold is a hard asset. It doesn't lose value when governments overspend. It doesn't depend on political promises or central bank policies. It's tangible, finite, universal. By expanding both production and reserves, China is hedging against currency risk, reducing reliance on Western financial systems, and positioning itself for a world where the dollar's dominance weakens. Picture the contrast. In Washington, money is printed to fill budget holes. In Beijing, vaults are filling with physical metal. Each bar represents a direct challenge to the G7's financial leverage. Every ton of gold China stores is a step away from the dollar-centric system the West depends on. And every new U.S. payout funded by borrowing, not assets, pushes America deeper into vulnerability. If you were choosing where to stand at the end of this economic cycle, would you rather hold claims on borrowed dollars or tangible reserves held by a country preparing for a global reset? This isn't speculation, it's strategy, and it's accelerating. The Great Divide. America prints China plans. The split between the two superpowers is widening, and it's not just about gold, it's about philosophy, about vision, about how nations prepare for the future. The United States is pushing out more debt to stay afloat. As America's national debt moves from 38 trillion toward 40 trillion, one problem rises above all others: the cost of servicing that debt. Experts warn that interest payments are now growing so fast they're starting to crowd out essential spending. Money that could go to education, infrastructure, healthcare, or innovation is being redirected just to pay interest on past borrowing. That financial pressure builds long before the public feels it, but once it hits hard. Schools close, bridges crumble, services get cut, and the people who suffer most are those who can't afford private alternatives. China, meanwhile, is shifting gold and financial flows eastward. Every ton it accumulates puts more weight behind its long-term strategy and chips away at the dollar's global dominance. When confidence in the dollar softens, U.S. leverage weakens. America starts paying more to borrow. China becomes more insulated, and the balance of power shifts. For you, this means the safety of the U.S. financial system is no longer something to take for granted. The dollar will likely remain powerful in the short term. But the cracks are spreading. Inflation still lingers. Interest rates remain elevated. Asset bubbles form under the surface. And when those bubbles burst, the people holding real assets win. Those holding debt promises lose. So these payouts, $2,000 here, a tariff dividend there, aren't free policy ideas. They're a gamble. A gamble that the world will keep accepting the U.S. system. A gamble that rising debt won't matter. A gamble that you won't feel the consequences. But the long-term reality always arrives. The endgame: two nations, two futures. One nation is buying time with borrowed money. The other is buying power with real assets. And in a global reset, Those two strategies do not end the same way. The $2,000 check you're being promised isn't relief. It's a political illusion designed to distract you from a much larger crisis, a crisis of debt, of inequality, of fading confidence in the very system that once made America the strongest economy on earth. China isn't playing the same game. It's preparing for a different one, a world where gold matters more than promises, where production trumps printing, where patience beats panic. The question you need to ask yourself is this: when the dust settles, which side of history do you want to be on? Because the shift is already happening. The only question is whether you'll see it coming. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and stay informed. The next chapter of the global economy is being written right now, and you don't want to miss it.